Welcome everybody to our Research Fellowship applicant webinar. This is really a time to give you a briefing on the cross-justice system linked dataset. So we have colleagues here today from MOJ to kind of take you through the data first set of datasets. And it really is an opportunity for you to hear more about the datasets and ask any questions that you have about them. So I'm going to try not to speak very much this morning. I do have a quick poll for you we've been running through our previous webinars just to hear a little bit more around your experience and your interest in the fellowship scheme. So I'll just launch that now whilst I talk through my first few slides and then keep adding people in as they come. So just to run through some quick housekeeping, please do keep yourself on mute whilst the presentations are ongoing. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A this morning. We do have 90 minutes set aside, but previous webinars have not been used that full time, but we do have that available. So plenty of time for Q&A. So please do feel free to put all your questions in the chat. If there are questions today we just don't get to, we run out of time, we've been following up by email and writing up responses to the Q&A and posting those online as well. So those will be available to you. And we are recording this and we'll make the recording available on our webpage after the meeting, as well as the slides as well. So really the aim, as I've mentioned, is just to give you an opportunity to hear more about the latest offering from Data First and the datasets that are being made available through the ONS SRS. And we've been running dataset briefings to kind of help share more information about this. I'll hand over shortly to Kylie, Georgina and James, and then really the bulk of the time of today is really just to go through that presentation and focus on the data set today. I will say a few things very quickly about our fellowships, but before I do that, just super quickly, for those of you not familiar, I'm Greg Meredith, based within the ADR UK Strategic Hub, leading on our research offering and evaluation elements. And I'll kind of hand over to Georgina, Kylie and James to introduce themselves now. Georgina, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Georgina Eaton. I'm lead statistician and principal social researcher in the Data First Research Academic Engagement and Comms team. I'll pass you over to James next.
Morning everyone. I'm James Doherty. I've been working at the MOJ on Data First for almost exactly a year now, covering a couple of different things. Various pieces of our sort of supporting documentation and that kind of thing, and just general sort of support for kind of users of our data set. And yeah, I will pass over to Kylie.
Hi, I'm Kylie Hill, also a statistician working at Ministry of Justice on the Data First programme, on the Research Academic Engagement and Comms strand, and generally doing work to support researchers to access and use our data and make data available for research in the public good.
Great, thank you all. And so before I do hand over, I mean, really, the reason we're here today, we're promoting the Data First datasets as part of our ADR UK Fellowships opportunity, which was launched 5th of July and closes on the 10th of October this year. We're running an expressions of interest stage, so we really want to hear from you as to whether you're intending to apply and really hear a little bit more about your project at this stage, as much as you know at the 15th of August, so that we can help prepare our review process and support you really with submitting more feasible applications. Really, we have experts on the data within MOJ that will be able to provide some feedback on your plans for using the data sets. So we're offering that support from mid-August. There will be feedback on those EOIs that you submit. And just some key features we want to run through. We are based within UKRI, so for those of you not familiar, our eligibility criteria and who we can fund is all listed online. You can check if your organisation is eligible and if you as a researcher are eligible as well. You don't have to be a permanent member of staff to apply, so long as you've got approval to be hosted at an eligible institution for the duration, simply so that we can fund you within that organisation. We will make a funding panel decision on these fellowship applications, hopefully around December. Those decisions are conditional on receiving approval from the various data owners and ONS on your project going ahead. So just to flag that as well. We're running an applicant webinar next week covering how to write successful fellowship application, which I'll post some links in the chat to. And earlier this week, we ran through all the processes and expectations of our fellows to share that with everyone, and the recording is available on our website as well. So I'll provide links to that. That's as much as I wanted to say about the fellowships today. And really, I'll hand over now. I think I'm starting with Georgina to get into the data sets.
It'll be Kylie first, actually.
Yep. Okay, so I'm Kylie from Ministry of Justice. Three of us here today to take you through cross-justice system link data and its research potential. So I'll give you just an overview of the Data First programme and the cross-justice system link data set, which is one of the focuses of this ADR fellowship call. Georgina will give you a bit more information about the contents and the coverage of the different data sets which are parts of this cross-justice system link. So that covers magistrates and Crown Court, prison, probation, family court, civil court data. And then James will go through some of the research questions and areas that can be addressed with this data, just some of the kind of priorities that we are interested in promoting as part of this call, and a little bit about further information. And as Greg already said, if you have questions as we're going through this, please do put them in the chat and we will try to respond to them as we're going through. So hopefully we can cover some things off kind of before we get to the end and have more time for discussion. So Data First, we're an ambitious data linking research academic engagement programme led by Ministry of Justice, and the programme is funded by Administrative Data Research UK, who are also funding this particular fellowship call. And the purpose of Data First is really to unlock the potential of the wealth of data which is already created by Ministry of Justice in the delivery of frontline services. So the data which is involved in this project is administrative data from the kind of operational systems being used in the courts, the prison, probation services in England and Wales. So as people move through those services, we're collecting data about them, about their interactions with those services and about their outcomes. And what the project is doing is linking that data from various different sources at person level so that it can allow better analysis of users' pathways through the criminal justice system and their interactions with other justice jurisdictions. So the project is also driving forwards the linking of justice data with data from other government departments. I believe there was a webinar earlier this week about the MOJ DFE data share, which links police national computer data with education data from the National Pupil Database. So that's slightly separate from the data we'll be covering today, but you may also be interested in looking up that. And then Data First is enabling accredited researchers across government and academia to access de-identified research-ready data sets in an ethical and responsible way. So we're doing that by sharing our data with the ONS Secure Research Service and also now with the Sale Data Bank in Wales. And it's really an integral part of the programme to work in partnership with academics, particularly to deliver research using this rich new resource. And the ADR Fellowship Scheme is a really important way that we're kind of setting up and facilitating new research projects to make best use of this data. And we hope that this will provide new evidence that will really underpin the development of new government policies and drive real progress in tackling social injustice problems. So the data we're talking about today is a new linkage of the civil, family and criminal justice administrative data sets. We've already made these data sets available to researchers, but there is now going to be a new linking data set that connects the records across these different sources at person level. This gives a new unique identifier to people appearing across the justice system. So you can build up a picture of the characteristics of justice system users, how they interact over time with justice services in England and Wales, and use information from any of these different data sets within the projects. So this has been done using probabilistic data linkage, using our open source Splink package that has been developed in-house at Ministry of Justice to link and deduplicate administrative data flexibly, transparently and efficiently. There's a lot of information available about this package and how it works that you can find online. We can point you to. Understanding more about the characteristics of users, the patterns of frequent use of justice services and how people transition between different areas of the justice system is really important for us to develop our understanding of what works and inform the development of policy. So this slide gives a hypothetical user journey, and this really gives an indication of the kind of information that you can find out from our data sets about the person's user journey. So in this example, we can see that John is taken into care as a child, and you would see that in the Data First Family Court data set. That's an outcome of a family public law case. Then the next time that he appears in our data is as a defendant in the magistrate's court. You would see in the data set that the outcome from this particular court case is that it's committed to the Crown Court for trial, and you would then find a corresponding record in our Crown Court data set with information about the same case linked by the same person ID. Within the court's data set, you'd find information about sentencing. If that involved a custodial or non-custodial sentence, you would see information about those people appearing in our prisons or our probation data sets. So John is sentenced to 18 months in prison. You'd see him appear in the prisons data set. You'd see what kind of prison he's been allocated to, and some information about his time in custody. So after completing half of his sentence, John is released on licence, and he is under the supervision of the probation service. You'd see if he's subject to any conditions or requirements such as electronic monitoring within that data set. And then you'd also see if there are any other kind of interactions that John has with other areas of the justice system. So subsequently to his time in prison, we can see that John is involved in a civil court case where he is the tenant in a possession case where the landlord has made a claim for repossession of the home as he's missed multiple rent instalments. So there might be interesting connections that pop up that you may have an interest in. That just gives a flavour of the kind of information that you might be able to see about somebody who did appear across a number of our data sets. So here is the full list of the data sets which you can request as part of this linked data set. So the Magistrates Court Defendant data set, Crown Court Defendant data set, and those can both be linked together on both the person and on the case level. Then we have other criminal justice data from prisons and probation. Again, these focus on the defendant or the offender. And then we've now added in for the first time with this call, the family court and civil court data sets. So these include information about multiple parties within family and civil court cases, and any of those people involved might also be linked to the criminal justice datasets. The linking dataset itself is a separate dataset, which you would also want to list in your application alongside any of the component datasets you want to link. And as I already mentioned, we also cover in Data First the MOJ DFE data share, but that is a separate linkage. And just to be clear, that is not something you can request to be linked to these other datasets. I think that brings me to our hand over to Georgina.
Yeah.
So she'll give you a little bit more detail on each of these.
Thanks, Kylie. So I'm just going to take you through all of the separate data sets to give you a flavour of different types of variables and information that's available. So starting off with criminal courts, and we have two separate data sets covering this. So we have Magistrates Courts defendant data set and our Crown Court defendant data set. So starting with the Magistrates Courts, this is extracted from the Magistrates Courts Management Information System known as Libra. And the dataset contains around 18.1 million records and has been deduplicated using the Splink package that Kylie has described already. Within this, you expect one record per defendant per case in our flat file dataset, which gives details on characteristics, offence, proceedings and outcomes in cases dealt with by the Magistrates Courts in England and Wales, and this runs from 2011 to the 31st of March 2023 in our updated version. The data set itself contains around 60 variables, so it looks at characteristics of defendants such as age, gender, ethnicity, dates of hearings, types of offences, arrests and the initiation date of proceedings. And the data explains how proceedings were dealt with and provides information on the final plea of the defendant. And other data includes details on bail, remand and whether the defendant was committed to the Crown Court. In this latest version of the data share, we've now got a new table which has separate records for all offences within a case. And this also includes information on civil cases in magistrates' courts, which includes various dates, types of proceedings and the plea. We'll now move on to our Crown Court data set. So this one is extracted from the Crown Court Management Information System known as Exhibit. And this data set contains around 1.2 million records, and again, it's deduplicated. So in our flat file data set, there's one record per defendant per case, giving details on characteristics, offence, proceedings and outcomes dealt with in the Crown Court in England and Wales, running from 2013 to the 31st of March 2023. The Crown Court data set itself includes over 100 variables, including the dates of hearings, types of offences, arrests, and the initiation date of proceedings. And this data explains how proceedings were dealt with and provides information on the final plea of the defendant. In the latest version of this data share, again, we have a new table from the previous data set, which has separate information on all offences within a case. So these are separate records. If we can move on to the next slide, please. And we now move on to our prison data set. So the prisoner custodial level data set provides data on offenders' custodial journeys in prisons and selected young offenders institutions in England and Wales up to the 31st of March 2023. And it's been extracted from what is known as the Prison National Offender Management Information System, which is the admin data system to log the prisoners and the offenders. So the data on the offenders serving custodial sentences since 2011 is expected to be complete, but sentences that sort of begun before this are also included. Her data set contains almost 1.5 million records and is deduplicated. And in our flat file data set, there's one record per prisoner per custodial journey. So each separate instance that a person was imprisoned during the period, but combining connected spells in custody, remand and recalls. And this is providing details around their personal characteristics, so things like age, gender, ethnicity, nationality and religion, and whether they're a young offender. It also provides information on the main offence, the sentence length and various dates, and release information. The data set itself contains approximately 50 variables covering information on all of the things that I just mentioned. And as well, with the sort of latest update, we have 2 new tables available in this data share. The first table looks at movements and locations, which includes information on offender location assignments whilst in custody, reasons for transfers and movements. And we have our third table, which is our safety in custody table, which contains information on incidents within prisons, such as self-harm, assaults, and details of those incidents, their outcomes, and how the prisoner was involved. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to go into our probation data set. So this data set provides data on service users, offences disposals, community order requirements, licence conditions, post-sentence supervision requirements, and pre-sentence reports in separate tables. So it's extracted from what is known as National DELIUS, also known as NDELIUS, which is a system used for management of offenders subject to probation supervision. And it covers records with an offence referral date from the 1st of January 2014 up until the 31st of March 2023. And this data set contains around 2.3 million records of deduplicated data. Within the data set, there's over 100 variables spread across 5 different tables within the data set. So the main table, which is known as the flat file, contains 1 row per an offender event. It contains information on offender characteristics, such as age, gender, ethnicity, and residence, as well as offence information, disposal information, and sentencing information. The flat file table can also be joined to an additional 4 tables that we have as part of this data share. So 3 of these tables each represent a type of sentence component. So these provide information on community requirements, licence conditions, and post-sentence supervision requirements. And each of these tables provide information on the length of the sentence component, as well as details about terminations for each one. The final table that can be joined to the flat file table with this one contains information on pre-sentence reports that are recorded in National DELIUS. And this includes the type of report and the proposed requirements. Just to note as well that full coverage of pre-sentence reports is not available in this extract. If we move on to the next slide, please, thanks. Next up, we have our family court data set. So the family court data sets provide data on users of the family court and cases dealt with by the family courts in England and Wales between the 1st of January 2011 and the 31st of March 2023. And it's been extracted from the Family Court Management Information System known as FamilyMan. The data set contains almost 13.8 million records of deduplicated data. There are 76 variables across 3 tables within the family court data set. So one table contains people involved in family court cases or parties. The second covers cases within the family courts, and the third provides events within a case. So the cases table provides information about each case heard in the family court. So the type of case, so within this it covers public law, private law, adoption, divorce and family law act. It also contains the number of hearings associated with the case, which court it was heard in, as well as a number of additional derived fields that can be relevant for research purposes. The events table provides information on events occurring in cases. So these can be anything from sending letters, a record of hearings, or an issue of an injunction or other type of order. And there's information about the hearing, application and order information, the court information, and other sort of key dates for those. The people table provides an anonymised deduplicated set of users of the family courts, which includes personal characteristics such as gender, some information around the month and year of birth for children, and stuff around the local super output area of residence. It also has some information about their role and their case information as well in that particular table. And these tables can be joined between each other as well. And then if we move on to the next one, please. The next one is our civil court data set. So this data set contains around 54.2 million records. It's been deduplicated and it's taken from two administrative data sources known as CaseMan, where civil cases are processed by the county courts in England and Wales, and something known as PCOL, which are claims submitted through HMCTS's Possession Claims Online service. So there are actually 12 tables in this data set, which can be joined together. And the tables provide information on cases, people and organisations that are parties to civil cases, so claimants or defendants, and key events and outcomes within cases such as hearings, judgments and warrants. A civil case will usually have multiple people or companies involved. So, for example, a claimant and then a defendant, and may have many events which are sort of each included as a separate record here. So within the CaseMan administrative data system, so the county court case management system, you'll expect to see case types including money claims, personal injury and damages, mortgage and landlord claims, but it doesn't include family matters, tribunals, civil cases in magistrates' courts or high court cases. In the Possession Claims Online data source, we have things in there such as eligible mortgage and landlord possession cases only, and some claims appear within both systems and can be joined. The coverage for this data set runs from the 1st of January 2012 to the 31st of January 2020 and covers England and Wales. If we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So giving you some details about all the different data sets, and all of these can be linked via our cross-justice system linked data set. And as Kylie said, if you want to do the linkage, you'll need to make sure that you add this into your application form, as well as the separate data sets that you want to use. So the cross-justice system linked data set will allow you to join up persons across the magistrates' courts, Crown Court, family courts, civil court, prisons and probation data sets. So all of the ones I've just mentioned. Well, obviously, if you want to use a few of them, then you're able to do that as well. So the linking data set itself acts as a lookup to identify where records in the various data sets refer to the same people. So the linking data set will contain rows for all records in the probation, prison, magistrates' courts, Crown Court, family court and civil court data, plus a new estimated person ID, which appears alongside each instance believed to be and correspond to the same individual. So this enables us to group up records by individuals, and repeat appearances can be investigated. So this cross-justice linking data set will enable new insights on end-to-end user journeys across the criminal, family and civil justice system, and including how offenders flow between those key justice services. And I think now we move on, and James is going to talk through understanding the research potential of all of this data that we've got.
Thanks, Georgina. Hi again, everybody. So yeah, having talked about the data sets themselves and what they contain, we'll now just go through a bit about their research potential and the sorts of questions that they can, and perhaps just as importantly, the sorts of questions that they can't be used to answer. So it's important to note, first of all, that the sort of administrative data that we're talking about can only really help address certain types of questions. So quite broadly speaking, across the data first data sets, you can see who is interacting with the justice system and in what ways, their kind of movement through the system, so the processes and the timings involved, and what we've referred to as fairly kind of hard outcomes, so things such as sort of sentencing, perhaps other disposals such as maybe community orders or fines, and repeat appearances of the same individuals in the system as well. What we cannot do is address information on users' unmet needs, their specific circumstances and experiences of their engagement with the justice system, and at this stage we can't really provide information on sort of longer term outcomes for individuals either. So what we are focusing on with sort of data first is sort of users of the system. So that is defendants, prisoners, ex-prisoners on probation, sort of parties to family and civil court sort of cases. What we will not be providing information on, or very little information on, is members of the judiciary, sort of legal professionals, court and prison staff. There is limited data available on some public users of the system, such as victims and witnesses. And this is where we refer to sort of big a window into the big picture and small subsets. So having data on all defendants' cases, offenders in custody or under supervision in England and Wales, that's obviously a very large number of records, a large number of individuals in cases. And what that should hopefully allow you to do is to sort of drill down into slightly more niche groups, depending on your own area of interest. So that might be information on ethnicity, it might be particular offences or case types, it may be other sort of demographic information, say depending on your own area of interest. So what about sort of proposed kind of research questions? We've got some sort of suggestions and starting points here. These are deliberately quite broad. Certainly the questions in bold are deliberately quite broad. Firstly, because it's not, I suppose, really our job to kind of point you too obviously in any one direction in terms of where you would want to take your research with this. And also because I think there's often maybe an assumption that a proposed research question in an application to us needs to be incredibly specific. That isn't necessarily the case. They can be quite broad research questions. It's really primarily about you sort of knowing what you want to do with our data sets and how our data sets will help you to answer your research question. So as I say, we've run through some very kind of rough and sort of broad ideas here, but you may be interested in the links between users of the civil and the family courts and the criminal justice system. And more specifically within that, that could be connections between, for example, housing and property disputes and criminal cases, or perhaps interaction between family court cases and instances of either domestic or child abuse that are occurring, that are coming up in the criminal court system. You might be interested in how issues such as employment, debt, housing, sort of family issues, how they interact with and reinforce each other, and also how do people move through different sort of jurisdictions within the justice system as they attempt to solve these. So again, to be slightly more specific on how you might look into this, you could be interested in the impact of a sort of parental imprisonment or criminal offending in family law cases. You could be looking at how sort of pressures that initially come into the system as civil law cases might escalate into criminal law cases. The likelihood of someone appearing in the civil courts for a sort of home repossession or eviction following time spent in prison, the impact of short repeated sort of prison sentences, and how sort of civil and family law cases, for example, covering sort of repossession, debt, divorce, how these connect to each other and potentially occur at the same time within different parts of the system. You may want to understand better the flows for either initial entry or re-entry into the justice system, and how the sort of policies and the practices of external organizations might have an impact on that. So that could be the impact of sort of welfare sort of policy, the impact of cost of living, which is obviously incredibly relevant at the moment, the impact of COVID-19, and how these pressures connect both to each other and to cases that might occur within the criminal court. And then also how do individuals in the justice system vary and compare across jurisdictions? So you might be interested in sort of particular protected characteristics, and if these experience kind of different circumstances within the system, or the experiences of different socioeconomic and other demographic backgrounds. And then finally, for this slide, who are the repeat users of the justice system? Does involvement in one particular area of the justice system appear to influence offending or reoffending? And as we've addressed previously, we're obviously interested in ultimately what works to enable effective outcomes across the justice system. And some examples of this, you may be interested in the impact of sort of family court cases on the children involved in them. Are those children then at an increased rate or an increased risk, of, for example, early criminal offending than the general population? So those are just some initial ideas. I say they are deliberately quite broad, and that's obviously by no means an exhaustive list of sort of potential research areas, but it's just to give people some initial ideas. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So just trying to represent some of this maybe slightly more sort of visually, we've highlighted here some of the overlaps that we thought may be of potential interest to people. I won't go through and read and read every one of them aloud, but I'll just pick out a couple of examples. So in that bottom row there, sort of youth offending. So that could include information from our courts, our prisons, and our probation data sets. And you may be interested in how that would overlap with sort of children in family law cases. So, for example, children who are potentially taken into care, and you would be able to look at the overlap between people appearing in both of those data sets. Or, for example, in the top row, in the middle there, the overlap between sort of prisoners and prison leavers, and sort of tenants in sort of repossession cases in the civil court. That could potentially provide you with some insight into the challenges that are facing prison leavers, and how they are other ways in which they may appear within different parts of the justice system following their release. And the link, just as a final example, the bottom right there, defendants in sort of domestic abuse related cases in the criminal courts. It would be an obvious area of interest to see where these overlap with adults in sort of family court cases. So again, by no means an exhaustive list, but that's just some pointers for kind of areas of overlap that might be of interest to people. So I'll just wrap up sort of my section here by just pointing you to where you might find some additional information. So that at the top there is the link to our sort of the Data First section of the gov.uk website, where you'll find some documentation like our user guide and sort of data protection information, our existing data catalogues, which I think have been sort of referred to in the chat already. So they're a good guide to what is, and also, again, almost as importantly, what is not in our existing data sets. And you can find our own analytical outputs to date as well, and our application form. There's also links there to further information on sort of Splink, ADR UK, and the ONS Secure Research Service. And if you've got any queries relating to any of our data sets or anything like that, that's our email address there, datafirst@justice.gov.uk. And with that, I think I am handing back to Greg to run through the last few slides.
Thank you. A lot shared there. Thanks for that, James, Kylie, and Georgina. I think there's a lot of data sets to get through, and a lot of information to share as part of this. I'll leave the slide up. I think I've shared links to the call. There is a earlier start date, later start date suggested there. So I think there's a question in the chat. But I think I don't have any other slides really to share on this one. It'd be good for us to focus on the data. So I will share the slides around and the recording when it's available. You'll have contact points. And really, I'll stop sharing my screen now. We can get into the Q&A session. I think there's been some really good questions in the chat that I think we should pick up. I think Kylie and Georgina have been doing a great job of picking some of them up as we go. And I think I'm trying not to lose track of ones that we've addressed and not addressed. But I think I guess there's been a few questions around additional linkage, around what to expect either in future. There's been conversations around the OASIS data, which is great. And maybe we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we are planning a further fellowship call in 2024, hopefully launching in February. I don't know, Georgina or Kylie, whether we want to say anything around expected additions that may be available for that.
I think for that one, we do hope that the OASIS, so that's the offender assessment data set that we're working on at the moment, to be available. So that will be able to link that with all of the data sets that you've seen here today. So that should be available, though don't expect any of the time periods that you've seen today to be changed. We tend to only be able to update our data sets on an annual basis, as it takes quite a lot of resource to do that. But yeah, we're also keen to consult with some academics as well on our OASIS data set. So if you have any experience or are really keen to sort of help with that consultation, please do get in touch with the Data First inbox. We'd be keen to hear from you and get some academics involved with that, just so we can, talk about ideas that we've got for the data set and to see if it would work for some researchers. So yeah, if you're interested in that, yeah, just drop us a line, the email.
That's really, really helpful. Thanks. And I think the feedback is really valuable for bringing in new additional tables or variables to future iterations. So really encourage people to get in touch about that. I wonder if I could pick up, I think there was a question from Carly around the whether there'd be a longer sort of date range, a range of data available in future iterations. I don't know, Carly, if you want to come in and expand on that, or Georgina, I know you just said you're likely not going to expand it massively, but it will be refreshed annually, brought up to date.
Yeah, there are some additional complications as well with expanding the date ranges. So quite a few of the administrative data systems that these data sets are based on are moving to new reform systems. And some of these are switching off, or there's a transitional period. So some of the data is not quite available to us at the moment to be able to share beyond the time periods that we've got, but we also need to make some quality assessments as well on those data shares and to understand how people across the department are using it. So that's why I think that also contributes to the reason why we may not be able to update all the time periods again to a later time period in the next fellowship call. But obviously we'll have to see closer to the time how things are going. But definitely, obviously, it will cover the periods that are stated today, which is still reasonably recent anyway, and still has sort of quite long time periods, which is really good. So.
Great, and please do, if you're listening to this and want any follow-up or just want to come off out of the chat and ask a question live, please do feel free to raise your hand and do that as well. I'll just keep moving through some of the comments. I think we're getting there with them. I think we've responded, I think, on the whether you'd be able to identify a specific prison an offender was in, I think, in that one, but do come back and let us know if there's any follow-up questions to that, or speak up, Kylie or Georgina, if you want to add anything to that question. I don't know if there's a question around whether in the civil court cases you could identify what was claimed.
So you could certainly see the kind of monetary amount that's been claimed. You would also see, I guess, if there's been any kind of orders, for repossession, etc., whether or not those have resulted in repossession. If there's anything that might have been recorded as sort of free text, then I'm afraid that wouldn't be included in the data set. So if there's any more kind of case by case reparations sort, then that might not be available in the data.
Great.
If that answers the question.
Yeah, please do come back into the chat or come off mute and ask if there's any follow-up questions there. I think we've had a thanks in the chat. There have been some other questions. Very quickly, I can answer how many fellowships are available. We have a flexible budget for this round. We've advertised that we have funding for around 10, but it really does sort of depend on the quality of applications received. We've frequently had more funding available to spend than we have been able to spend. So hopefully that's a good indicator that this is a healthy scheme to apply to, and really encourage you to apply. Yeah, we're hoping to fund around 10, but have some flexibility to go beyond that depending on the quality received, which is why I think, and Georgina mentioned it in that part of the presentation, we're really keen just to support your applications, submitting feasible applications. We do frequently have to rule out applications based on misunderstandings of what's available in the data set, and they're quite, there's a lot of documentation to look through and understand, and if you're new to the data sets, it can be quite difficult. So I think we're encouraging you to come and talk to us early and share your ideas and explore that, really just to give the feedback around your early ideas. So I think we've had another question just following that, understanding the data sets in the following way. They provide the meta information and some of the key information about the full text cases searchable in bold org. Is that correct? Do we know?
I think if I understand that correctly, then that's right. Yeah. So the data we are extracting comes from these kind of management information systems. So it's mostly quite kind of dry information about dates, categories, what the outcome was. It's not recording that kind of really rich information about what was said in court, the evidence provided, and the kind of written text of the judgments. So yeah, you would need to look at other sources for that. But it is just, it's giving you that very large scale picture of what's happening in every court case. So there's opportunity for that kind of quantitative analysis of what's going on in the justice system, rather than, I think, as James said, that kind of more qualitative understanding. And there's not potential through this call, at least, to link to the full text of the cases. That's not something as part of the programme that we've got any permissions to do at the moment. Obviously, I think that would be of interest to people if that were to happen in future, but they're very separate at the moment.
Great, thanks for picking that one up as well, Kylie. I think there's been a slightly different question, I guess, around the transition from ONS SRS to IDS and the implications. I think at this stage, we're inviting a funding application only. Later, after the funding panel, we will invite successful applicants to submit a RAP application to access the data. We'll know a little bit more later in the year as to what about the transition to IDS. We're envisaging that this will remain on the ONS SRS, and there'll be details around the software packages that are available there in our previous webinars. So please do go check that out if you're not familiar with that. We've been working with IDS teams to get a promise that there will be similar software available in the IDS before we start transferring projects over. So that's hopefully going to be a much more gradual transition across to try to get the software in place. So we'll be in a much better position to advise on that later in the year, but we're expecting that it will remain, at least for these projects, within the SRS space. Do you want to add anything to that, Georgina?
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say as well, they've said that, they're happy to keep sort of dual running for a period of time, to be determined anyway. So obviously, if you ended up in a situation where you could only use particular software in the SRS and not in the IDS, they might give you some sort of exception just so you finish your project, and then that would be that. So yeah, I think it'll be looked at, I think, on a case-by-case basis, as far as I'm aware at the moment. That's how they plan to do it.
Great. I think, Annabelle, definitely do feel free to get in touch. It's not a requirement to get in touch with us on August the 15th. Do come as soon as you think you've got an early idea, share it, and ask questions. Please encourage that. So we're receiving expressions of interest sort of every day now. So please do send those in, and we're sharing those around as they come in as well. So you don't have to wait till the 15th of August if you don't want to. Question from Timothy: are there any data on individual usage of programs whilst in custody? E.g. participating in therapy programs, job training, etc.?
That's not something that's been included in our prisons data set at this point. So yeah, information about which prisons people are at different points in time, when they've left prison on particular sort of programs possibly, and information about safety incidents while in prison. It's the main thing we have at the moment. I'm afraid, yeah, it doesn't cover all of the information that might be collected while people are in prison. Appreciate there is a lot more that goes on that would be of interest. And can I just come back to an earlier question related to what I covered before about kind of information we're providing? The follow-up question about pre-sentencing reports, and that's very much the same thing, that we've got some key information about what was covered in a pre-sentencing report, but it's not the kind of full text of the sentencing report. So as a whole, on the Data First programme, we're making data available that's very much de-identified, and so it's very difficult to provide those kind of data sources that would contain probably a lot of information about the individual and their circumstances.
Great. I think our last remaining question in the chat is around whether we know the characteristics of judges within the UK data, drawing on some similar US research.
So no, we don't have information about the individual judges involved in the case or their characteristics, but also there's not information about whether cases were dealt with by the same judge even.
Great. I can't see any more questions coming up, and I've just got a flag up that my my laptop may die shortly because I've not plugged it in. So bear with me one moment. I wonder whether it's. I'll give people a minute or so just to kind of share anything through, but I mean, really just want to signpost to the Writing Successful Fellowship Application webinar next week. ADR UK has launched some of its early fellowship rounds using the data first data. So we do have now a growing cohort of fellows and researchers that have had early access to some of these sort of early linkages. And there's a lot of experience to share and draw on there. And during that webinar, there will be experiences shared and practical hints and tips and things. So drawing on our fellows, which have pretty much exclusively been used in the data first data sets. So just a signpost there whilst we whilst anything else comes in. Do we have any citations between cases? Do we know? Do we want to? I wonder if the person could expand on that question a little bit if it's unclear. To maybe come off. So as to whether cases are citing each other. Do you know, Kylie?
I don't think that is captured in the data. We would see information if multiple defendants are kind of on the same case together. They would each have a record that's connected by case number, but other information about connected cases, I don't think is there.
Great. Thanks. I think there's been a lot of love for the ASIS data set in the chat, which is really great. And I think we've had a question come in there. If you were successful for a fellowship on this round, could this data be linked to an existing data set once it becomes available, or would it be better to hold off until the next round? We haven't advertised the OASIS dataset for this round. We knew it was sort of almost coming, but do you want to share how fellows should approach that really?
Yeah, I mean, we have had some fellows in the past where they started their project based on some core data sets, and then as new data sets have come online, what you'd have to do is you'd have sort of an amendment form essentially to complete to request access to the additional data set, and then that would go through some approval processes with data owners. So technically it would be possible, but obviously, yeah, it would be, I suppose, yeah, it's if the data owners allow it essentially. But yeah, I don't see there being an issue, but obviously the main focus is the data sets that we have currently, and making sure that, you know, all your outputs are sort of completed to time. So whether, you know, adding in an extra data set might mean that you might need an extension, and I suppose it depends with obviously you'd have to have some discussions with ADR UK colleagues on whether that would be possible or not. So
yeah, I think our steer would be to focus on the data sets that we've advertised. I think they're not official, like fully over the line, and that those deadlines can drift, and we're not entirely sure when that will be made available and linked in. And we don't want to fund a project where you're then having to wait for a data set to come if that isn't already readily available. So that's the reason we often experience delays with sharing agreements and, you know, quality assurance on the data sets we're releasing. So hesitant to plan a project around needing a data set that's not over the line just yet. So that would be our steer to focus in on that. I think we've had a question around the MOJ DFE data share and OASIS as well. I wonder if we take that to offline and put the question to Kirby and the team. Is that?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's best because I'm not sure. It would depend on what is held on the police national computer. So I think if there is some OASIS data that's held there that then comes through into that extract, that will dictate, you know, what is available through it, and it's separate from what we're doing kind of from the live OASIS system and looking to create a new data set.
Great. Yeah, Hannah, I will forward the question on to Kirby and the team, and we'll. Okay, great. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, good follow up though. I think we'll make sure we add a note to that opportunity just to clarify for any other applicants as well once we get a response. Well, I think I'm going to start the wrap up now. And just say a huge thank you to Georgina, Kylie, and James for coming on and presenting the data sets. As the collection is growing, these presentations are getting longer and longer and more complicated. And I think there's an acknowledgement in the chat that this is just such a massive undertaking and a massive piece of work. But we're at the really exciting stage where we get to release the data sets for external access to you all. And we've presented some research priorities today, but as James also mentioned, we don't want you to feel limited by those. We really want to fund policy relevant research, but also, don't feel limited by the potential broad questions that we've presented as part of that as well. We're excited to kind of see how you want to use the data sets, using them to their kind of fullest potential, really is kind of what we're aiming for with the fellowships there. So huge thank you to MOJ colleagues and for everyone sort of commenting in the chat. Hope this has been a really useful presentation today. As I say, there'll be slides and recordings shared, and there'll be contact email addresses. So if you do have any questions, do just get in touch with us early. And if you're unsure about anything about an application to use the data, then do just contact us early about that. Happy to have that conversation. Any final words, Georgina, Kylie, or James, before we wrap up?
No, just to note to Hannah, Kelly's got back to me already on your queries and the responses in the chat.
Perfect. Oh, thanks so much for that, Georgina. That's really helpful. Well, have a great day. We will follow up with slides and recording and over an email to everyone that attended. And we look forward to receiving your applications and queries. All right. Thank you all.